It was a Tuesday in October 1968. A bank van rolled through the late-morning traffic of Tokyo, carrying what then felt like the pulse of the post-war boom: payroll cash, bonuses for factory workers, nearly 300 million yen in paper notes. The street smelled faintly of oil and autumn. The guards in the van were on routine patrol, practiced, unhurried. Then a motorcycle slid up beside them. The rider wore the uniform of a motorcycle police officer. He spoke calmly, the kind of calm that comes with an official title. "There's a bomb under your vehicle," he said. He ordered the men out. They complied. He crawled under the van as if performing a safety check, his movements matter-of-fact and expert. Minutes later, when the guards looked again, the officer was gone, and so was the van. No shots, no physical struggle, no dramatic chase. No one could describe his face with certainty. The money, 300 million yen, evaporated into the city. More than half a century later, this crime is still unanswered. Welcome to Still Unanswered. I'm Maya Clark. Today, we go back to Tokyo, October 1968, for what is often described as one of Japan's most audacious unsolved crimes, the 300 million yen robbery. We'll do more than retell an almost cinematic scene. We'll try to separate what's documented from what has been embellished, and we'll ask the harder question: why, given the scale of the search and the attention, was this never solved? No music today, just the story, the facts that survive in police files and newspapers, and an expert to help me think through some of the institutional and cultural forces at play. Joining me is Dr. Kenji Morita. Kenji is a criminologist and historian who specializes in post-war policing and major crimes of the 1960s. He's been a recurring voice on this show. Kenji, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I always appreciate the calm you bring to these cases.
Kenji, let's start by setting the scene. Tokyo, 1968. What does a listener need to understand about the country and the city in that moment to grasp why a man in a police uniform could so easily disarm trusted bank guards?
You have to imagine, Tokyo was transforming. The post-war economic miracle was in full motion, so large sums of cash were moving routinely. Bonuses, wages, corporate payments, a lot of value still tangible as paper. Politically, the late 1960s were tense. There had been student protests, there were concerns about anarchist groups and bombings. The police were visible. Their authority was generally trusted, not unquestioned, but trusted enough that an officer's word carried weight. So, when a young man in a motorcycle uniform told you there was a bomb, it sounded credible. It fit the moment. People expected, or feared, violence. That fear made the deception plausible.
Right. And the van involved was from Nihon Shintaku Ginko, Nippon Trust Bank, transporting bonus payments for Toshiba employees. Explain that part of the logistics. Why was that money on the road?
At that time, many companies paid bonuses in cash. The bank had scheduled deliveries to factories. Armored transport was simpler than frequent banking or electronic transfers, which weren't as developed. So you had a bank vehicle, 2 or 3 armed guards, a driver. Routine procedures that, if you knew the schedule and the route, were predictable. That predictability is central to the story.
Let's walk listeners through the robbery as it's documented, step by step. A motorcycle cop, the impersonator, stops the bank van, says there's a bomb. He calmly orders the guards out to inspect. He uses a believable official voice and posture, maybe even a mock display of procedure. He slides under the van. He triggers smoke or flares, something that suggests imminent danger. The guards panic. They flee to a safe distance. The man then climbs into the driver's seat and drives off. No shots, no one hurt. The van disappears into Tokyo. It all looks almost surgical.
Surgical is an accurate word. The operation relied on theater and authority rather than violence. It's an interesting point about the psychology of compliance. When told a dangerous situation exists by an apparent official, people often default to avoidance rather than confrontation. That's a social reflex exploited here. That's a shosha, a social reflex, exploited here.
The aftermath was immediate chaos. Guards realize the officer is gone, along with the van. An alarm is raised. The police mobilize thousands of officers. The media turns it into a national obsession. Describe the scale of the response.
The mobilization was extraordinary. Thousands of police officers, roadblocks, there were nationwide alerts. Every dump, riverbank, highway stop was searched. Japan had never seen a manhunt at that scale for a bank robbery. The media coverage was relentless. It became not just a crime story, but a symbol that even in a modernizing Japan, systems could be outmaneuvered.
And despite that, no one was arrested for the van heist. But the police did find things, items, leads, letters. Let's talk about the evidence and why it didn't lead to a conviction.
Investigators collected a lot. There were flares, tools, and a motorcycle, later found to be stolen, among other items. They also received a barrage of tips, letters claiming responsibility, and follow-up false bomb threats that may have been linked or may have been opportunistic. The problem is twofold: quantity and quality. You had hundreds of items and thousands of leads. Filtering truth from noise without modern forensics is incredibly difficult.
Exactly. In many ways, the abundance of potential clues was as damaging as having none at all. Investigators were spread thin. Sometimes they pursued local youth gangs based on circumstantial ties. Other times they chased anonymous letters that turned out to be pranks. Kenji, can you explain how the limitations of 1960s forensic methods would have affected this?
Absolutely. Forensics then didn't have DNA analysis. Fingerprint databases existed but were rudimentary compared to today's integrated systems. Crime scene preservation standards were less rigorous. Contamination happened. Also, the analysis timeline was slow. Tracing a stolen motorcycle or matching handwriting took time, and with suspect leads multiplying, the police faced real bottlenecks. If you add public pressure, the need to show progress, mistakes can be made in prioritization.
The case also produced suspects, or at least persons of interest. Some stories are well attested. Others drift into rumor. Let's be careful and stick to documented threads. One recurring angle is an inside job. How plausible is it that someone at the bank or Toshiba leaked schedule information?
It's plausible. The operation required precise knowledge, timing, route, the fact that cash bonuses would be on board. Investigators looked at bank employees and anyone who might access schedules. They questioned people with even tenuous connections. The difficulty is that internal leaks can be small, a casual remark, a predictable routine, and those are hard to prove unless someone confesses or documents are discovered.
Another angle points to organized crime, the Yakuza. On the surface, it fits: organized networks, capacity to launder money. But the robbery's method seems atypical for Yakuza patterns of the time. Kenji?
Yakuza certainly had the capability to organize thefts, and they had networks to launder cash, but the precise impersonation and the restraint, no violence, no public intimidation, doesn't match the more aggressive, reputation-driven crimes Yakuza often used. That said, criminal organizations are diverse. It could have been a fringe group, or separate criminal elements could have been used without the official crime showing signs of gang involvement. There's no clear smoking gun connecting established Yakuza figures to this robbery.
Then there's the lone genius theory, a single, meticulous planner. What supports that idea?
The scene suggests someone who understood police procedure and human behavior, how to calm or control a situation by simulating authority. A lone actor could minimize the risk of leaks. Fewer people in the know equals fewer potential informants. The weaknesses. Moving and hiding 300 million yen alone is logistically difficult, and the van had to be disposed of or hidden. A single person might have prearranged handlers or caches, so it becomes hard to reconcile true solitude with the logistical demands.
Over the years, a handful of people were strongly suspect but never charged. There's the often told story of a police officer's son who resembled a composite and later died, sometimes presented in sensational accounts as the missing puzzle piece. How do we treat such stories?
We treat them cautiously. They are compelling narratives. They fit a neat arc, but the archives show that physical resemblance alone is weak evidence. Where available, records often reveal contradictions or lack of corroboration. These personal stories can be valuable leads, but they are also the kind of human detail that media and fiction latch onto because they provide drama. In many cases, they remain circumstantial.
Let's pause and center on the money itself. 300 million yen in 1968. How much is that today, roughly? And why does the absence of followable spending matter?
300 million yen in 1968 would be equivalent to several $1,000,000 today, depending on the conversion and inflation assumptions. It was a staggering sum for an individual, and yet there was never a clear, conspicuous trail of expenditure. No one turned up driving in obvious luxury that could be tied directly to the theft. That suggests one of two things. Either the money was laundered very carefully through small purchases and business routes, or it was dispersed into assets and activities that left a weak forensic footprint.
Or perhaps it disappeared into legitimate businesses or into cash economies where tracing is inherently difficult. The lack of a flashy spending spree deepens the mystery and suggests discipline. Kenji, let me ask, what are the investigative steps that would have been most promising in the weeks after the robbery, and did the police take them?
They pursued the obvious. Tracing the motorcycle, interviewing the guards extensively, searching for the vehicle, following tips and handwriting samples. But the problem was scope. With thousands of leads and immense public pressure, resources were thinly spread. Effective strategies in this scenario would have included concentrated surveillance of likely laundering channels, pawn shops, used car dealers, small businesses that take in large amounts of cash. But even that requires intelligence and time. There's some evidence the police did chase these routes, but not with the benefit of modern analytics or financial forensics.
And this was also an era when cultural expectations shaped the investigation. Kenji, you've written about how reluctance to publicly accuse people without airtight evidence could slow or blunt an inquiry. Can you explain?
In Japanese legal and cultural practice of that era, public accusation without strong proof could be seen as defamation or a ruinous blow to someone's life. The police, mindful of reputational harm and legal consequences, often preferred to build cases quietly rather than leak allegations. That caution can be an asset. It prevents false convictions. But in a high-profile case, it can also mean missed opportunities. Witnesses may be less willing to share rumors publicly. Investigators may avoid aggressive public pressure on suspects. And the slow, conservative approach sometimes clashes with the urgency the public demands.
Another crucial institutional limit, the statute of limitations. At the time, serious crimes had a finite window for prosecution. Explain what that meant in practice for this case.
In 1968, Japan's statute of limitations for certain serious crimes meant that after a number of years, varying by offense, you could no longer bring criminal charges. For the 300 million yen robbery, the statute of limitations expired decades ago. That means even if someone had been conclusively identified later, they couldn't be prosecuted for that specific crime once the limit passed. The case technically moved into a different legal posture. Investigatory interest and public curiosity remain, but the threat of formal criminal punishment is no longer present.
That legal closure, without a name, must feel unsatisfying.
It is. It creates a moral and emotional gap. Societies often need closure, a named offender, a court verdict, to integrate the event into the public record. When that doesn't happen, it breeds stories, speculation, and a kind of cultural vacuum where myth replaces fact.
Speaking of myth, the media has done a lot to shape how this robbery is remembered. Over time, it gained the label of the perfect crime. How did that mythologizing happen?
The elements are all there. A clean, non-violent theft, a brilliant, audacious method, an anonymous individual who outwitted large institutions. That's narrative gold. Newspapers and later television and fiction leaned into the drama. Manga and films borrowed the scenario. Each retelling often simplified or embellished details for storytelling, a natural tendency in popular culture. Over time, the story's margins expanded with rumor, until some versions read more like legend than a strictly documented police case.
Let's examine the leading theories with a critical lens. I want us to enumerate them and weigh the known strengths and weaknesses. First, the lone, highly prepared con artist. Second, a small, tightly organized team. Third, partial inside help. Kenji, take us through those in turn.
Theory 1. The lone con artist. Strengths: it fits the theatrical element, minimizes leaks, and explains why no one turned state's evidence. Weaknesses: logistics of moving 300 million yen, disposing of a van, and the need for secure hiding places argue against pure solitude. Theory 2. A small team. Strengths: practical. Handlers could move cash and vehicles, manage caches. Weaknesses: more people increase risk of detection. Secrets are harder to keep for decades. Theory 3. Partial inside help. Strengths: someone with knowledge could provide timing and procedures. Weaknesses: why would an insider risk such involvement? And again, evidence for a formal inside conspiracy is lacking in archival records.
Which theory do you find most plausible, Kenji, given the balance of probability?
If I must lean, I find the small team with inside knowledge hypothesis the most plausible. It resolves the logistical problems while explaining the clean, non-violent execution. The key thing is most plausible, not proven. We don't have a smoking gun, just a pattern that matches historical examples where small groups used minimal force and relied on deception and information to succeed.
You and I both agree we cannot and should not convert plausibility into certainty. That's the ethos of this show. Let's address the question that often follows. What happened to the money? We don't have an answer, but we can consider possibilities.
Possibility 1. Careful laundering through numerous small transactions. That would reduce risk and visibility. Possibility 2. Conversion into assets, property, businesses that provided a legitimate income stream. Possibility 3. Transfer out of the country through criminal networks. Possibility 4. Partial waste. Some could have been spent, some hidden, some lost. The absence of a glaring spending trail suggests either excellent laundering or conservative use, slow integration rather than immediate extravagance.
Do we have any documented efforts by banks or the government to track larger patterns of cash circulation after the robbery? Something like monitoring unusual deposits or asset transfers.
There were inquiries and cooperation requests, but banking privacy and the era's limited cross-institutional data made such monitoring inefficient. The authorities did alert banks and financial institutions to be vigilant, but systematic monitoring across multiple institutions was not as feasible as it would be today with digitized records and interbank communication networks.
We've been circling what I think is a vital theme. The robber exploited more than a gap in security systems. He exploited social trust, the way people defer to authority. There's something moral and psychological here about why the scene unfolded without violence.
Yes, it's an exploitation of normative behavior. In Japanese society at the time, and to a degree still today, there is a reflex toward compliance with perceived authority. An officer's uniform is not just clothing, it's a symbol that reduces others' propensity to resist. The robber weaponized that symbol, not with force, but with performance.
It's also worth noting the human dimension among the guards. They weren't stupid. They followed procedure as they understood it. When faced with a plausible bomb, retreating was reasonable. I want listeners to understand that we're not describing negligence. We're describing a professional deception.
Absolutely. The guards made a judgment in a risky situation. We can't retroactively judge them harshly. They followed a protocol designed to preserve life. This is what makes the robbery ethically complex. The perpetrator exploited a morally defensible instinct to avoid harm.
Before we move toward closing reflections, I want to ask about modern possibilities. If this crime happened today, how would things be different? What tools would investigators have that were unavailable in 1968?
Today, we'd have CCTV and digital traffic cameras, ubiquitous in urban centers, which might capture the motorcycle or the van's route. Phone metadata could show communication between suspects. DNA analysis could pick up biological traces from objects. Financial forensics could trace suspicious deposits and patterns of spending across institutions. Social media and digital footprints make it harder, though not impossible, to disappear. But notably, the robber's greatest advantage in 1968 was cultural trust. Even now, impersonating an officer can still exploit social reflexes, though modern verification protocols have improved.
Right. So modern tools would make anonymity and moving cash more difficult, but no system is foolproof. There's always human unpredictability. As we wrap up, let's synthesize why this particular crime remains unanswered in our lifetimes.
It's a confluence. The robber relied on deception and authority rather than force, leaving few forensic traces. The forensics of the era were limited. There was an overwhelming volume of noisy leads. Cultural norms constrained public accusations, and the statute of limitations removed the legal pressure some years later. Add time, fading memories, and lost or degraded evidence, and the equation tilts toward permanent mystery.
Put another way, the case sits at the intersection of timing, culture, and technique. It's less a failure of people than a perfect storm. Now, there's an ethical and emotional layer here I'd like to explore briefly. What does it mean for a society to carry an unsolved crime in its cultural memory?
It becomes a story about vulnerability and myth. People project fears and fantasies onto the mystery. The unsolved crime becomes a mirror reflecting anxieties about institutions and the unknown. It can also be a cautionary tale about overconfidence in systems. For historians like me, these cases are useful. They tell us as much about the society that remembers the crime as they do about the crime itself.
For our listeners who love puzzles, there's a final invitation. Even though the statute of limitations prevents prosecution, intellectual curiosity can keep the case alive in productive ways. If you study the archival records, question assumptions, or unearth little-known leads, you contribute to historical truth, even if the legal case is closed. Kenji, before we close, are there any lesser discussed angles or archival stones you'd like to encourage listeners to look under?
Yes. First, small business records from the era, pawn shops, used car dealers, may hold patterns often overlooked. Second, regional cross-referencing of vehicle sightings in the days after the robbery sometimes remains buried in local police logs. Third, oral histories, interviews with retired officers, former bank staff, or factory workers can preserve context not captured in formal files. These human fragments are messy but valuable.
That's a great point. Sometimes the best clues hide in what we call the low-grade evidence, routine documents, overlooked receipts, a retired teller's memory. All right, let's recap the core unanswered questions that remain at the center of the 300 million yen robbery. Who was the man in the motorcycle police uniform? Did he act alone? Did someone inside provide scheduling information? And where did the money go?
We can add, why, despite intensive investigation, did the trail go cold? And what does the case teach us about the limits of policing and the power of social trust? Those remain open.
If you're listening and you have a tip or an archival angle we didn't consider, we want to hear from you. Send us notes, especially if you can point us to primary sources, old police logs, or interviews that haven't been widely reported. If enough new information comes in, we'll consider a follow-up mini-episode. Kenji, thank you for joining me. For your careful context and restraint, you help remind us that enthusiasm for theories has to be married with a respect for archival limits.
Thank you, Maya. I always appreciate the thoughtful way you frame uncertainty. Cases like this deserve nuance.
And to our listeners, thank you. This is still unanswered.